All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling a topic that might seem a bit dry at first, but trust me, it's more relevant than you might think. We're going deep into the world of Texas law, specifically the difference between a regular complaint and something called a verified complaint. Now, you might be wondering why you'd ever need to know this, but stick with us. Whether you're dealing with a tricky neighbor situation or just trying to decode those legal dramas we all love, understanding these legal tools can actually be pretty empowering.
I agree. It's one of those things that seems very lawyery, but once you break it down, it's surprisingly useful knowledge to have.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When we talk about a complaint in the context of Texas law, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, think of a complaint as the official document that kicks off a lawsuit in Texas. It's basically the plaintiff's opening statement, where they lay out their side of the story, what they believe happened, and what they're hoping the court will do for them.
So it's kind of like setting the stage for the legal battle ahead.
Exactly. It's where they air their grievances, explain how they were harmed, and what they want to see happen.
Gotcha, that makes sense. But then we have this other term, a verified complaint.
It sounds a lot more serious. What's the difference?
You're right. It does have a more serious vibe, and for good reason. A verified complaint is like a regular complaint, but with an added layer of gravity. The key difference is that it includes a sworn statement from the person making the complaint. It's called a verification, and they're essentially saying, I swear under oath that everything in this complaint is true.
Whoa, okay, so it's not just paperwork. They're putting their reputation on the line with that statement.
Exactly. That sworn statement adds a whole new level of weight to the complaint, It's not just their perspective. They're vouching for the truth of it.
I'm starting to see why this is important. And is this extra step, the verification, ever actually required?
It is in some cases. For instance, if you're trying to get a temporary injunction, which is basically a court order to immediately stop someone from doing something, Texas law often requires a verified complaint for that. So let's say, hypothetically, you have a neighbor who decides to build this massive, noisy structure in their backyard. And it completely violates local building codes, right? You want them to stop construction immediately. Is that when you'd need a verified complaint?
You got it. A verified complaint where you swear under oath that you're telling the truth about the situation and the harm it's causing. That can be crucial in convincing a judge to issue that injunction and put a halt to the construction right away.
Okay, that's a great example. It definitely makes it easier to understand how this applies in the real world. But this brings up another question. If you file a verified complaint, doesn't that also make it easier for the other party, the defendant, to challenge your claims? Like, if they can find even a small inconsistency in your story, wouldn't that really hurt your case?
That's a really important point. It's one of the strategic things you have to consider. A verified complaint can be very powerful, but it also opens you up to more scrutiny, definitely. So if you're not completely certain about every detail, or if there's a chance your memory might be fuzzy on some points, a regular complaint might be the safer bet.
So it's kind of a trade-off then.
Yeah.
You get more power with a verified complaint, but there's also more risk involved. It's all about strategy.
Exactly. You have to weigh your options carefully and figure out the best approach for your specific situation and goals.
Fascinating. So more weight, more risk. Got it. Now, you mentioned earlier that the penalties can be more severe with a verified complaint. Can we talk more about that? What does that mean exactly?
Right. So the whole thing hinges on that sworn statement because you're swearing that what you're saying is true. If it turns out you've made any false statements in your verified complaint, the consequences can be much more serious. You could actually face perjury charges.
Perjury. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's a criminal offense. It can lead to pretty hefty fines, even jail time in some cases.
Wow, I see why they call it a verified complaint. It's a serious legal tool, and you definitely don't want to use it lightly.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just about being truthful. It's about understanding the weight of that sworn statement and the potential consequences if the court finds you've been dishonest.
It's all starting to make sense now. So choose your battles carefully and understand the implications. That's the key takeaway here, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with the basics. I think I have a good grasp on why a verified complaint carries more weight and why it's important to be absolutely certain of the facts before you file one. Now, I'm curious, what exactly makes a complaint verified? What needs to be included in that sworn statement?
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the verification itself. It's usually at the end of the regular complaint, and it's a very formal statement. Basically, it confirms that everything stated in the complaint is true, to the best of the filer's knowledge.
So it's not just a casual add-on. There's a specific structure and wording to it.
You bet. It has to be written out, signed by the person making the statement, and then it needs to be either notarized or include a specific legal declaration that carries the same weight as a notarized statement.
So it's all about making it official, ensuring there's no doubt about the person's understanding of the seriousness of what they're claiming.
Exactly. It's about accountability and making the whole process transparent.
What happens if someone accidentally includes something in their verified complaint that's not quite accurate? We talked about penalties before, but could you elaborate a bit more on how those play out in real-life scenarios?
Sure. The main thing to remember is that a verified complaint is made under oath, which is why accuracy is so important. So if any of those statements turn out to be false, the person who signed it could face those perjury charges we discussed.
Perjury charges. Wow, that's no joke.
It's not. It's a very serious offense, and it can have significant consequences.
That definitely underscores the importance of being completely honest and thorough when dealing with a verified complaint. No room for exaggeration or embellishment, huh?
Right. It's not just about getting your point across. It's about adhering to a very strict legal standard of truthfulness.
It's really all coming together now. Verified complaints are powerful tools, but they come with a lot of responsibility.
Exactly.
You know, while we're on the topic of verified complaints, I'm curious about something. We've been laser focused on Texas law today, but I'm wondering if these concepts exist in other states as well? Or is this a Texas-specific thing?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely explore further in our next segment.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. I like it. All right, folks, we'll be back soon to broaden our legal horizons and see how these ideas play out in other parts of the country. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. Before the break, we were getting deep into the world of verified complaints in Texas. And just as we were about to explore if these concepts exist in other states.
We left you hanging.
We did, didn't we? So to the beans. Are complaints and verified complaints a Texas thing, or do other states have their own versions?
Well, you'll be relieved to know it's not just a Texas quirk. While the specific terms and procedures can vary, most states have similar concepts in their legal systems.
So it's like a common legal language with different regional dialects.
Exactly. The idea of kicking off a lawsuit with a formal document that outlines the plaintiff's claims is pretty universal. And the concept of adding a sworn statement to give those claims more weight, well, that's pretty widespread too.
Okay, that makes sense. So
Yep.
even though we've been deep in the heart of Texas law today, the knowledge we're gaining has wider applications.
Absolutely. The principles we've been discussing can help you understand legal proceedings in other states as well, even if the fine print is a bit different.
That's fantastic news. It makes this deep dive even more valuable. It's like unlocking a secret code to the legal world, and the code works in multiple places.
I like that analogy.
So as we wrap things up today, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they now have a clear grasp of the difference between a regular complaint and a verified complaint. That sworn statement makes a huge difference in terms of legal weight. And of course, those situations in Texas where a verified complaint is absolutely required.
Like when you're trying to get that immediate action from a judge with a temporary injunction.
Exactly. And even when it's not mandatory, there might be strategic reasons to choose a verified complaint over a regular one.
It all comes down to understanding the nuances, weighing your options, and making the best decision for your specific situation.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been incredibly informative. I feel much more equipped to navigate this area of law now.
Glad to hear it.
Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners before we sign off?
Absolutely. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to take legal action, especially here in Texas, do yourself a favor and consult with an experienced attorney. They can walk you through the process, answer your questions, and make sure you're taking the right steps.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. This deep dive has been for informational purposes only, and it's not a substitute for professional legal advice.
Exactly. A good lawyer can be your best ally in navigating the legal system.
Well said. And with that, we've reached the end of our legal journey for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of complaints and verified complaints. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of a legal landscape. Welcome back, folks. Now, before the break, we were knee-deep in the world of Texas complaints, the regular kind and the verified kind.
Yeah, breaking them down, figuring out when you'd need one versus the other.
And that leads right into that cliffhanger you left us with. Are complaints and verified complaints unique to Texas, or is this something you see in other states too?
Well, the good news is it's not just a Texas thing. Most states have their own versions of these concepts, even if the names and the specifics might be a bit different.
Oh, okay, so the principles are pretty widespread.
Exactly. Think of it as different dialects of the same legal language.
So the idea of starting a lawsuit with a formal document that lays out your claims, that's pretty universal, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And the whole concept of adding a sworn statement to add more weight to those claims, that's pretty common too.
So even though we've been talking Texas law, this information could actually come in handy in other parts of the country too.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding the core principles, you know? The nuts and bolts might vary from state to state, but the big picture is surprisingly similar.
That's great. It makes this deep dive even more valuable for our listeners, no matter where they are. All right, so as we wrap up this episode on complaints and verified complaints, what are the key things you want our listeners to walk away with?
Well, I hope they now have a really solid understanding of what sets these two types of complaints apart, you know? And especially the fact that that sworn statement in a verified complaint, that really does carry a lot of legal weight.
It's like raising your right hand and swearing to tell the truth in court, right? It takes things to a whole new level.
Yeah, exactly. And they should keep in mind those specific situations in Texas where a verified complaint is actually required by law.
Like when you're trying to get a temporary injunction.
Right. Exactly.
And even when it's not required, it could still be a smart move strategically, depending on the circumstances.
You got it. It's all about knowing your options and choosing the best approach for your situation.
Well said. I feel like I've learned a ton today, and I bet our listeners have too.
I hope so.
Any final words of wisdom for our audience before we sign off?
If you ever find yourself in a situation where you think you might need to take legal action, especially here in Texas, the best thing you can do is talk to an experienced attorney. You know, they can help you figure things out, make sure you're doing everything by the book, and guide you through the whole process.
Yes, absolutely. That's so important. And on that note, I want to remind everyone that this deep dive has been for informational purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional legal advice, so definitely reach out to a qualified attorney if you need help with a specific legal issue.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of complaints and verified complaints. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the legal landscape. Until then, stay curious.